This is a new format for me. Short little blurbs about my posts on my website. Most recent one on there is about personality disorders. And one of the questions I have, and even psychiatrists have, is are these in fact mental illnesses? By virtue of the fact that they're called personality disorders, I suspect they are, but most believe that they're only a disorder if they interfere with one's life. There does not seem to be any genetic origin, hereditary aspect to these disorders, but rather they are felt to be acquired and environmental. I first came across the concept of personality disorders uh, when I read Susanna Kayson's book in 1993 entitled Girl Interrupted. That was a memoir of her in 1967, beginning with a taxi ride to a psychiatric facility in Massachusetts. By her own account, she states that she was being hospitalized supposedly for a few weeks for borderline personality disorder. I didn't really understand that concept or even thought much about personality disorders until I read this book. And then I did some searching, and I found out that personality disorder includes some of the following things. Uh, these folks are impulsive, they have difficulty with interpersonal relationships and self image, they fear abandonment, and they don't generally try to kill themselves, but they have a tendency towards self harm, such as scratching their arms with minor cuts, but deep enough to leave scars. Uh, Now there are another nine so-called personality disorders, but I'm briefly going to mention an 11th, um, nine plus borderline, and then an 11th at the end. Briefly, the first is schizoid personality disorder, which is not to be confused with paranoid schizophrenia. It does have some features, though, of simple schizophrenia, namely introverted, withdrawn, emotionally cold, and distant. Paranoid personality disorder, again, not to be confused with paranoid schizophrenia in severity. These folks perceive actions of others as threatening and therefore are untrusting. Schizotypal personality disorder, these folks feel a need for social isolation and they feel anxious in social situations, sometimes with odd behavior and thought processes. Antisocial personality disorder, I think we've all become familiar with, but this is distinct from the last one I'm going to talk about. These people ignore normal rules of society, are somewhat irresponsible and callous, with little regard to legal issues for irresponsible behavior. Narcissistic personality disorder, I think, can be well summarized by Donald Trump. I think we can say that he has an increased sense of self importance and a sense of unlimited success, needs constant attention, is oversensitive to failure, and seems willing to exploit others for his own benefit. Avoidant personality disorder are people who are hypersensitive to rejection and they need constant reassuring that they are doing the right things. Dependent personality disorder is a pattern of dependent and submissive behavior relying on others to make decisions. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder, again, well known by most people, and described as high levels of aspiration, very conscientious, strive for perfection, very orderly, very methodical, do not tolerate interference with their routines, don't adapt to change well. Another one that's not very well known is histrionic personality disorder. These people need attention. They need to be the center of attention. They're somewhat dramatic, acting out roles to others, have difficulty with relationships. They crave novelty and want to uh, use their personal appearance to garner attention. For these disorders, psychologists are the first line therapy rather than medications because they do not involve neurotransmitters or distinct brain abnormalities. So, for example, anti-anxiety agents can be used and cognitive therapy to reduce these disorders from interfering with life. I want to talk briefly about psychopathic personality disorder. This is a standalone diagnosis. Again, it seems to be more environmental from upbringing. These folks are typically what one consider as the serial offenders, sometimes serial killers. Again, there's a theory that genetics plays a role in some and that some are secondary, namely the result of environment and upbringing. Features of psychopathy are uncaring, callous, lacking empathy, inability to feel emotions, unable to feel guilt, shame, embarrassment, lack fear, and blame outcomes on others. So these people can be very charming and personable, and they easily con others for personal pleasure. They carefully plan out their acts of violence. Ted Bundy is an example of this. In fact, Ann Rule, the recently deceased true crime writer, was working right next to him as a volunteer in a suicide hotline organization for the University of Washington, where he was a student. She wrote a book about him called The Stranger Beside Me. I'm going to briefly mention the word insane because it is only used to describe, and only should be used to describe, paranoid schizophrenia in crisis. These people are off meds, are out of control, and are not aware of their actions. So none of the personality disorders or other mental disorders really qualify, for example, for insanity defense. Well, that's about it for this little episode on personality disorders. I hope you'll tune in more on my website, www.mdgolden.com, or reach out to me at paul@mdgolden.com. Thank you, and have a great day.